House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 3 saw the first military action of the Dance of the Dragons, this conflict that is emerging. We've seen several failed assassination attempts prior, but the actual first taking of land or position for strategic purposes took place with Daemon's taking of Harrenhal. This castle is of massive importance both to this story and to Westeros as a whole, so today I'm going to take a look at a bit of that importance both to this story and to A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones, and get into analyzing some of what Daemon sees and what exactly transpires at and in Harrenhal in Season 2 of House of the Dragon. I'm Quinn the GM, and if you enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for much more on House of the Dragon Season 2. Also, just general question before we fully get into it. What did you think of this episode? I'd love to hear your opinion. I thought it was quite great, but overall the last scene was kind of weird and maybe didn't need to happen, but overall I think it was quite good. I'd rank it above the first episode, but the second episode was incredible, so not that high. But yeah, good episode with one big question mark at the end. Harrenhal is a big, spooky, ruined, cursed castle. It is very famous. We see it several times throughout the main books and the main series, Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, reversed respectively. And we do get to see it through a number of characters' eyes. In the books, we see it through Jaime and Arya. In the show, Catelyn goes there as well. And we've seen it in House of the Dragon, too. Earlier on in Season 1, we saw the burning of a portion of it that resulted in the deaths of both Lionel and Harwin Strong, carried out by their son and brother, Larys Strong. And what is also worth noting is that House of the Dragon starts in Harrenhal. The first scene of this entire show is the Great Council of 101 AC, which takes place in what appears to be one of the main halls of Harrenhal. It's very fascinating to see kind of the first actual action of the war take place where the seeds of this conflict were initially sown about 30 years prior to any actual conflict breaking out. It's pretty neat, and I think it was a very good choice to begin the show with that scene in such an important location. Going back a bit further into the history of Harrenhal, it was initially built by a man named King Harrenhal. He was an Iron Islander, and he lived in the Riverlands after having conquered them, and spent most of his life building this massive castle that was then the largest castle in all of Westeros. The bones of it remain quite large, I believe still the largest in Westeros, but it is in a ruined state, because when Aegon the Conqueror came to Westeros, he burned the castle due to Harren's defiance, and it is said that the spirits of Harren and his sons haunt the halls of this castle to this very day. It's a very interesting place, and a ton of people have held it, both in just Westerosi history and in the main series itself. I actually have an entire video going into the lore of Harrenhal, evaluating whether or not the curse exists, but I thought it would also be interesting to evaluate it in the context of House of the Dragon, as I do think that this seems to be the first actual window we have into the strange magic from a character's perspective within Harrenhal itself, through Daemon's eyes. The Lord of Harrenhal, when this series began, was Lord Lionel Strong, one of my favorite characters from Season 1, just because of how great of a counselor he was. He unfortunately met his end in Season 1, Episode 6, where him and his eldest son and heir, Harwin, were burned to death by his younger son, Larys Strong, because Alicent hinted that, oh, maybe it would be nice if my dad came back, so he committed a fratricide and patricide, as you do. But overall, Larys is currently the ruler of Harrenhal, though we've actually never seen him there. He didn't actually burn it down himself. He sent a guy with a little firefly pin to do it, and he's remained in King's Landing to kind of serve at court and be as useful as he can be and build up power for himself. And it does very much pose a problem for him insofar as his castle, the seat of his power, the main source of it, has been taken by Daemon at this stage. Not a great look overall, and I think that it could prove problematic for Larys in the future. We'll see. As previously mentioned, Larys Strong is the current lord, but he's not there at the moment. Simon Strong is instead. He first appears in this episode, and I really liked his performance. Simon Russell Beale is the actor, and in my opinion, he kind of looks like an older version of Samwell Tarly, which I'm a fan of because I love Sam. I think that Simon is a very interesting character, as he is in a pretty precarious position. His family is so tied to the Greens, but also he does have blood on Rhaenyra's side. 3 of Rhaenyra's kids are technically his relatives as well. Simon Strong is pretty old. He is the great uncle of Larys Strong, meaning that he was not Lionel's brother, but rather he was the uncle of Lionel. So overall, he is pretty distantly related to Rhaenyra's kids, but he's also pretty distantly related to Larys. So that could at least inform some of what he did in this episode, but that does make sense that he would surrender to a dragon, because those are scary, and Harrenhal has already been destroyed by one dragon in the past. So why is Harrenhal such a vital strategic position? We see in the first episode of season 2 that both Aemond and Daemon, twin flames that they are, want to claim this castle for their sides. They view it as a very important toehold in the Riverland. I think they actually both use that term. It's a crucial strategic point because it is very centrally located, and despite being ruined, it is still a massive fortification. It's a great place for an army to gather, as we see that happen several times in the War of the Five Kings in the main series. Daemon's taking of Harrenhal is major and kind of the first real victory of the war for the Blacks, and it's really great to see. I do think that that will end up playing a pretty crucial role, as we've seen in other conflicts in Westeros, the Riverlands tend to be fairly important. Even looking at the history before House of the Dragon, it makes sense that Daemon and Aemond would think this. The two brief wars that have occurred prior to this period, being Aegon's conquest and Maegor versus Aegon the Uncrowned, both had very important elements take place in the Riverlands, as it is so central to Westeros that a lot of conflict just ends up happening there regardless. I feel bad for the Riverlands most of the time. I was really excited to see Harrenhal going into this season, and it really didn't disappoint. Ryan Condal actually did some interviews prior to the season beginning, as we'd seen Harrenhal in a few trailers. He very much kind of hypes it up as a very important location and talks about it in a way that made me so excited to just see it in general. He says in an interview, quote, "Harrenhal definitely is its own character in this show. Whether it's real or rumored, it does have this supernatural aura around it that does put people off. It's fascinating to see how that supernatural aura has come into being, as we haven't really seen it in the show before. We've seen it in the books alluded to, but when people were there in the show, it was just kind of this spooky castle that wasn't really haunted. But the House of the Dragon tends to be focusing a lot more on the magical elements of the world of Ice and Fire, and I think that that fact very much elevates Harrenhal from just this kind of abandoned castle to this very haunted location that I'm so excited to see more of in the rest of the season. Moving now into Daemon's visions themselves, I love the way they reflect his kind of inner psyche at this stage. To kind of examine that, Daemon is here for Rhaenyra, and I think that core is very much shown throughout this episode. On the surface, he is trying to win this castle for her army, this display of military strength in order to further their war effort. However, there's also that element from last episode, the fact that he wasn't just kind of sent by Rhaenyra to do this, he was actively cast off. They have this massive fight because he got this innocent child killed, and he is just sent away, almost even banished, like Viserys did several times for him. He feels powerless in his relationship and is attempting to regain some of that power by virtue of taking this castle for Rhaenyra. I think that this ties into his visions quite well as well. I was surprised to hear rumors early on in the season that Rhaenyra would return, and I honestly really like the way they implemented it. Game of Thrones really didn't do flashbacks outside of Maggie the Frog in season 5, and I think that showing young Rhaenyra in dreams is a great way to do that, as well as tie it into the inherent magic of Harrenhal that is so often hinted at throughout the series. A Song of Ice and Fire has some wonderful dream sequences, and it's great to see the show really begin to tap into that. I really miss that in Game of Thrones, and if they keep doing that, that could be big, especially for like dragon dreams that certain characters might have. Going further, I love the vision that Daemon has, both kind of starts and ends with the Weirwood tree. Of course, it ends with him waking up before that, and this woman tells him, "This is where you'll die," or something to that effect, which is incredible just imagery at the end. That scene also opens with a shot from the outside of the castle at the Weirwood, making it seem as though maybe this is something originating from the old gods or from the system of magic that exists in the tree's roots. It's really neat to see throughout, as there are a lot of connections to the first men and the old gods in the blood of the Strongs. The Strongs are a house said to be descended from the first people to inhabit Westeros, and those are the people who are very closely associated with these weirwood trees with the old gods and with the children of the forest, who we saw pretty briefly in A Game of Thrones. I also just really enjoyed the overall vibe of Harrenhal. I thought it was super cool. The running motif of it being super damp throughout is just fun to see. And I do think that having just these spooky elements, the bashing of the door or whatnot, just really adds to the kind of haunted castle motif. I also like that we see bats flying at one point, as it is kind of symbolic of the house that'll later come to occupy them, specifically House Went, who is the, I believe, ancestor of Catelyn Stark. She has a Went descendant in there, but they're also said to be somewhat magical in nature, and overall just adds to the overall kind of state of the castle as this spooky place. Overall, I think that this episode was very good. The ending scene was a little questionable, but overall, I am pumped for next week. Next week is going to be great with some very important and very famous book events. I will see you all then. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. It helps grow the channel, and I talk a lot about House of the Dragon and A Song of Ice and Fire. I should have another video out later this week. I'm continuing a series where I am discussing what happened to a book character in the most recent novel and getting you ready for what they're going to do in The Winds of Winter, which I think is probably hopefully going to come out soon. We'll see. If you enjoyed as well, be sure to leave a comment. I'd really appreciate it. Let me know what you thought of this episode, of this video overall, and yeah, I'd love to hear from you as well. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll be back with more in the very near future. Goodbye!